justice, and electoral politics. So I am excited to be able to welcome you tonight through Rights and Democracy and through our partners that are here from the Vermont Public Interest Research Group. So thanks to everyone for joining us this evening as we learn about how every 10 years or so, the state of Vermont redraws its state house and Senate districts and how you can actually have a say in this process. We are so glad to have Vermont Apportionment board members, Jeremy Hansen, Chair Tom Little. They're going to be joining us tonight to talk and hear from you all this evening as we go through this topic. I am super excited to share facilitation of tonight's event with Paul Burns, who's the Executive Director of VPIRG. So Paul, welcome. Please introduce us all to the great work of VPIRG and let folks know a little bit about what we're going to be going through tonight.
Thanks so much, Kaya. Really appreciate it. And thanks to all of you who are joining us. I know some folks I recognize, some I don't, but it's really great to have you with us this evening. You know, at a time when the daily news tells us that our democracy is under attack like never before in this country, I'm really grateful to be in a place where we can advocate for reforms, to bring more people into the democratic process, make our democracy work better. That's part of what we'll be talking about tonight. It's been my pleasure to be working at VPIRG, Vermont Public Interest Research Group, for over 20 years now. VPIRG was founded in 1972 on the campus at UVM. And for the last 49 years, we've grown to become the state's largest public interest organization with more than 40,000 members across the state. But for tonight's agenda, we're going to be joined by some very knowledgeable guests, and they will give us a sense of the context and the process of this redistricting. And then I will share some of VPIRG's priorities when it comes to redistricting. And we'll have time for some of you to share your thoughts and questions toward the end as well. So let's get right into this. We are so honored tonight, again, to be joined by two distinguished experts to help set the table for this conversation. Tom Little is an attorney in Burlington, served in the Vermont House of Representatives for 10 years, including 2 as chair of the House Judiciary Committee. Tom has also chaired any number of commissions and boards and processes. If you want something done in an organized and efficient way, Tom is the guy you go to. So we're really grateful to have him with us here this evening. Chris Winters is Vermont's Deputy Secretary of State. I've worked closely with Chris on a number of different issues. He has served in the Secretary of State's office for more than 20 years and is a champion of good government, democratic reforms, ethics, efficiency, and transparency. And it's an all-around good guy, and we are so happy to have Chris with us as well. So thank you both for joining us. And now let me turn things over to our guests to provide you with an update on the redistricting and reapportionment process.
Great. Good evening.
Good evening. Excellent. Thank you, Paul. Thank you, Kaya. We appreciate the opportunity to be here. I thought we would start out with a quick tour of the Legislative Apportionment Board website. And that just gives you everything you need to know about what the LAB is doing, and lots of resources there for you to dig deeper into what apportionment is all about. So I'm going to share my screen here, and we'll start on the Secretary of State's homepage. And you can see at the very top of that, can everyone see my screen okay? Great. At the very top of that, on that top bar, you'll find a tab for apportionment. And that'll take you right to the Legislative Apportionment Board's website. And from here, here's an easy way for you to contact the board directly. If after you hear this presentation tonight, you have an opinion to share with that board that you don't share here tonight, that'll email all of the board members. You can also find about the board down here below. If you click on that, you can get individual emails for each of the 7 apportionment board members. And here is a tab that'll be very important to you if you want to dive a little bit deeper. It's called Resources. And that Resources tab will take you to all of the survey results of a SurveyMonkey that we did. Hopefully some of you who are watching tonight had an opportunity to fill out that survey to tell the LAB what's important to you when it comes to redrawing district lines. You'll see some of the memos of the board. Every meeting is recorded. We don't quite have up the September 27th meeting yet, but you can see all the previous meetings of the board as they've been at this for approximately a year now, although not in earnest until recently when the census data finally came through, delayed from its originally anticipated date of when it should to get to the LAB to do their work. You can see their minutes. You can see some other resources here below from board members. And what I'm going to click on here now, before I do that, this link, Lab Maps and Data, takes you to a Vermont Center for Geographic Information website, which I think is really helpful in looking at how the population in Vermont has changed. This map in particular will be really helpful for you to take a look at and see the blue and the dark purple and the light purple is where population has decreased by town. And then the light green and the dark green is where population has increased in Vermont over the last 10 years, according to the census. So it's based on this that the lab is doing its work to redraw districts to try to achieve equal representation for all Vermonters. So I'm going to back out of there and go to this presentation that was given to the LAB almost exactly a year ago in kicking off reapportionment in Vermont. And I'm going to very quickly go through the history of apportionment and then turn it over to Tom Little to talk a little bit more about the standards for apportionment and the board's current work. So again, this was provided by Legislative Council, and you can see at the time they were very excited to kick off reapportionment, and so were we. And here we are a year later. We may not be quite as excited, but the work is really starting to heat up and kick off in earnest as we finally got that data from the US Census that allows the LAB to do its work. And so this slide is just saying that reapportionment really has changed quite a bit since it was put into the original 1777 Vermont Constitution. From 1777 to 1964, there was a one town, one vote and county rule. So each, in the House of Representatives, each town had its own representative. So there were 246 representatives in Vermont's legislature. By 1785, the first Council of Censors, that was the body that could propose constitutional amendments, recognized this was unequal representation. So it didn't take them long to figure out that this was unequal representation, and they proposed to amend the Constitution so that representation would be apportioned according to population and not just town, and this was rejected. In the Senate in 1836, when the 30-member Senate was created, each of Vermont's 14 counties had one senator, and the remaining senators were apportioned by population. Leading up to 1965, it was clear there was inequality in representation. Here's just an example. The 38 residents of Stratton had one representative, as did the residents of Burlington with 35,531. So very disparate representation there. A House majority could be achieved by towns holding only 9% of Vermont's population. Vermont's 22 largest towns were represented by less than 9% of the House members. And in the Senate, the one Grand Isle senator represented 2,927 residents, where the 5-member Chittenden Senate district, there was one senator per 14,885 residents. So a very unequal balance there. In the early 1960s, there were a few Supreme Court cases that said legislative apportionment could be reviewed by the Supreme Court. And the supremacy clause was clear that when there's an unavoidable conflict between a federal and a state constitution, the supremacy clause prevails. The federal constitution prevails. In the early 1960s, there was some Vermont case law pointing out that the House was grossly malapportioned in Buckley versus Hoff. And in the Senate, it was impossible to apportion the Senate in any way which will not result in at least a 5-to-1 disparity between the largest and smallest number of people represented per senator. In Vermont, here was the transition. Enter the Legislative Apportionment Board. The Buckley Court ordered the General Assembly to reapportion those 246 members down to 150 members based on population, not on town. It created the Legislative Apportionment Board at the same time. And then at a November 1965 special election, legislators were elected for 1-year terms, and then regular elections every 2 years began in 1966. At the time, the Constitution was under a 10-year time lock for amendments, meaning that it would take 10 years to pass any constitutional amendment. So the General Assembly was technically in violation of the Vermont Constitution until the reapportionment amendments were ratified in 1974. Here you can see in the Vermont Constitution as amended, the General Assembly shall establish senatorial districts within and including all of the state, and shall further establish representative districts within and including all of the state. The General Assembly may provide for the establishment of a legislative apportionment board to advise and assist the General Assembly concerning legislative apportionment. And further in that clause, in that section, if the General Assembly fails to revise the legislative districts as required, the Supreme Court, in appropriate legal proceedings brought for that purpose, may order reapportionment. And I think this is the last slide I'll do before I kick it over to Tom. This is the creation of the Legislative Apportionment Board. I'm going to do a couple more slides. It's a 7-member board. And speaking of Tom, there's a special master designated by the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court of Vermont, who's the chair. That's Tom Little, who'll be speaking to you in a moment. The governor appoints 1 member from each political party that has had more than 3 members serve as members of the legislature. And then each of those political parties appoints an additional member. So it's a 7-member board. The lab members must be Vermont residents for at least 5 years. They can't be current legislators or legislative staff. This is technically a 10-year term. The Secretary of State is the secretary of the lab, but actually has no vote. So we're providing support. And then there's a per diem for reimbursement of expenses. The lab's powers by statute, and you can look at the statutes in Title 17, Section 1901, I think not through 1911. Employing or contracting for experts or assistants, receiving assistance from governmental entities for obtaining information about population, holding public hearings, delegating powers to 1 or more of its members to investigate or hearing examiners in its employ. So it's important to remember that the Vermont's LAB operates in an advisory capacity. The Constitution requires the General Assembly to reapportion the legislative districts. So once the lab submits its proposals to the General Assembly shall then accept the proposal and enact it into law or substitute another plan for reapportionment. And Tom is going to talk to you next about this process of the board going about its work in creating these proposals and proposing them to the legislature. And in doing that, the lab normally submits a report explaining its rationale, which provides helpful information to the General Assembly and about the state. And now I'll pass it to you, Tom.
Thanks, Chris. I also want everyone to know that there are 2 other apportionment board members, Jeremy Hansen and Jean Albert, who are in the meeting. So welcome them in as well. And I'm going to go through some of these slides quickly because I want to be able to get to some questions from you all and listen to comments as well. But this process is all about trying to achieve Senate and House legislative districts that have substantially equal numbers of residents in them as the Constitution says, to maintain equality of representation as nearly as is practicable. And as nearly as is practicable is where the board spends a lot of its labor. The Constitution permits House districts of 1 or 2 House members, and in the Senate, each Senate district is 1 or more senators. In both cases, we are directed to do our best to maintain geographical compactness, contiguity, and adhere to boundaries of counties and other political subdivisions, i.e. towns and cities. You can go to the next slide, Chris, if you would. Or do I have control over that? Okay, there we go. Reapportionments based on population, as I noted. We base that on the most recent census from the U.S. Census Bureau. Those final numbers were due to be delivered to us under federal law in March, and we got them at the end of August. So we are behind 3 or 4 months. The legislature was kind enough to enact some changes to our statutes, because this work was supposed to be done by the middle of August under existing state law. Next slide. As we said, this is about population and achieving substantial equality of population district to district. The statute, which was recently amended to provide that there cannot be a Senate district greater than 3 members at large, which was addressed to the Chittenden Senate District, gives some additional guidance to the Apportionment Board and to the General Assembly about how we are to do our work in our turn, and then the legislature likewise. Next slide. This is a process that we are about to approach, and I don't think is very widely understood. And this applies only to the House process, not to the Senate redistricting. And in the House, the Apportionment Board is required to prepare a tentative or initial plan and map that lays out all of the House districts across the state. And we are required to send that out to all of the towns that are affected in the sense of having a town subdivided into 2 or more internal districts, or subdivided and have the town in 2 different districts, or included in a 2-member district. And that really includes virtually all the towns. The process permits and encourages the boards of civil authority of all those affected towns to take a look at the proposal and tell us whether they like it or not. And if they don't like it, how they would like it to be changed. Most towns respond to that, but not all towns do. We have been prompting the town clerks and others statewide that this is coming. It's the 3rd week in October that we have to do that. And then our deadline at the Apportionment Board is before the end of November. So we think we're giving the boards of civil authority 3 weeks. We're trying to give them a little more than that in which to respond. And then we have a real sprint at the end of our process to review all of those comments and counter proposals and get them into a final plan to deliver to the House. As I said, we don't do that part of the process for the Senate. Next slide, Chris. I think this is covered some of this already. There's a relatively rarely used process where towns in a quarter of the towns in a proposed multi-member district may ask for changes to that. This is after the apportionment process gets into the legislature, so I'm not going to focus on that too much right now. Next slide. Deviations. This is what, as Jeannie, Albert, and Jeremy will I'm sure concur with. This is where we're spending all of our time. The law requires substantially equal population. The Vermont Supreme Court and the federal courts have weighed in on what that means. The Vermont Supreme Court has been cautious about laying down a hard and fast rule about what that means. But the way we measure that, the way we are judged by the court is for the House, you take the state's population and divide it by 150. That gives you the ideal sized single member House district. You double that for a 2-member House district. And likewise with the Senate, you divide the total population by 30. And that is your ideal sized single member Senate district. What you will see if you look at the information and the maps and the data on the link to the Vermont Center for Geographic Information is that the actual population for each House and Senate district is now embedded in a map and also listed separately, together with the percent by which it deviates from that ideal population. So you can look at any existing Senate or House district and it will tell you whether it's plus 6.5% or minus 7.25%. And the courts will say at some point, and I should add that the courts measure this test, this approaching substantially equal population across all districts by looking at your proposed map or the adopted map in the case of the legislature and finding the district with the greatest negative deviation. That's the most people below the ideal population number, and then looking at the district with the greatest positive deviation, and the spread between those two districts is called the overall deviation. And the courts have said that an overall deviation of not more than 10% is presumptively okay and constitutional, and a overall deviation of 16% or approaching 16% may be problematic or troublesome, but the court has never laid down a hard and fast rule because the court points to some other redistricting factors in Vermont law that can be used by the Apportionment Board and in turn by the General Assembly to vary from strict narrow population deviations. Now I apologize, I sort of lost. I don't know whether there's another slide I should be flipping to, Chris.
I'll flip forward, Tom, and just chime in real quickly to say that based on the 2020 census numbers, that ideal House single member district number is 4,287 people. And that ideal Senate number is 21,436 people.
Right.
These are the 2010 numbers here, I think, that we see. And
you recall the map that Chris showed you on an earlier, when he was walking you through the Apportionment Board's website with the different colors. That was the town population. There's a corollary map for the existing House districts and another one for the existing Senate district that's color coded. And you can see in both cases, the trends are there that population has been reseeding in certain parts of the state and growing in other parts of the state. And this is these are trends that are not brand new. These have been going on for at least several decades, but the cumulative effect of those population shifts rolls up into this apportionment process and is putting the real pressure on the redistricting effort. What do we have? Yeah, this is some historical information about the overall deviation from the last 3 redistrictings. You can see that those overall deviations are relatively high. The deviations in the 2012 reapportionments adopted by the Senate and the House were never challenged. There were challenges in 2002 and in 1992, but the question of whether the overall deviation by itself was a constitutional flaw was never raised. What the court has made clear in some important decisions is that these other factors, which include preserving existing town, city, and county lines to the extent feasible, using compact and contiguous territory so the districts don't look strung out inappropriately, and recognizing and maintaining patterns of geography, social interaction, trade, political ties, and common interests. So to the extent in the final analysis that the legislature can support its decisions in drawing district lines in a way that has somewhat higher overall deviation by pointing out that it got there by carefully considering these other factors. If it does so in a diligent and credible way, the Vermont Supreme Court will tend to not overrule that and have to draw its own map. We could have a long discussion about that, but Chris has now put up the timeline for this process. This is actually the timeline from the prior law.
Yeah, throw this one out the window.
But when you think about it, the legislature, because people are going to want to start pulling their petitions for the primaries towards the middle or end of next May, and to do that, the Secretary of State has got to get the Secretary of State's work done before then. So you know what district you're in, and where to get your, where to file your petitions. The legislature really needs to try to get its work done by the middle or end of April, if at all possible. And it doesn't always work out that way, but that's certainly what they're shooting for.
And that's it, John.
That's it for the slides. Where we are right now in the apportionment board's work is individual members, some working in teams, are developing maps for Senate districts and for House districts. One of the things, and I will, Kaya, stop with this, that's important to remember is that while we have some very sophisticated mapping software to help us do this, if you start working on a House district, let's say, that has a very high positive population deviation, and we have some that are over 20%. Or if you start working on a House district with a very significant negative deviation, and there are some that are over 20%. In order to fix that, you have to adjust a district line that is the boundary line with another district. So you are, in a sense, automatically affecting 2 districts when you're trying to fix one. And that impact on the adjoining district could mean that it now has a population deviation problem that needs to be addressed. And that can affect surrounding districts as well. So it's a very much a trial and error process. And you get better at it as you go along. And we've got great support from the Secretary of State's office and from the Vermont Center for Geographic Information. But it is trial by error. I guess I can stop there. We've had a robust discussion about the advantages or disadvantages compared between single member and two member or multi-member districts. And I'm sure we can address questions if those come up. And that discussion among board members is reflected in the minutes of the September 13 meeting. So thank you, Kai. I'll stop there.
Thanks so much, Tom and Chris. Again, I'm Paul Burns with VPIRG, and VPIRG is so happy to be working with Rights and Democracy, Kaya Morris, in bringing this discussion to you this evening. Now, I want to begin with just a few more slides to highlight some of our concerns, VPIRG's concerns and priorities as we think about this process. And I'll just note from the top that we're not engaged in this. We don't get involved in this with any interest in supporting or opposing any particular political party. We're just trying to promote the ideals of democracy, to make sure that your voices are heard, to make sure that all voices are roughly equal in terms of the influence that they carry in this process, and therefore that the size of these districts being equal or as close to equal as possible is an important factor for us. So Tom Hughes, can we begin? Thank you. So I think we see, and Tom, we may see all of the slides off to one side here, but let me just begin and note that, again, I'm not going to repeat all of this. You've heard this, that every 10 years we go through this process. The 2020 data show, thank you, Tom, that 20% of the House districts have grown or shrunk to be at least constitutionally suspect. Tom Little explained, is the court going to declare it unconstitutional? That's obviously a question for them potentially to take up if it's challenged, but a significant deviation from that ideal number in 20% of the House districts. 31% of the Senate districts have grown or shrunk by a significant margin that might put them outside of that range of that we would consider comfortable from a legal perspective. And from our perspective, just like from a good democracy standpoint. Okay, next, Tom. Again, we have already seen a similar map. This one was developed by RAB, but using some of the same data points from the 2020 census. And this lists, just as an example, the House districts that are below the ideal sizes in that kind of pinkish red, and then the green are the House districts that are above the ideal sizes. Above meaning that they have grown and that they are now larger than what would be considered appropriate in terms of that deviation from the ideal that we're thinking about. So green is where the population has grown to be, we think, needing a adjustment, and then the red is where the population has decreased, which also triggers a need for adjustment. I will just state again, and we can move to the next, Tom, that as Tom Little said, there's nothing about this process that is easy. And every time you try to fix one problem, you may be contributing to another. We do understand that this is challenging work, but that just gives you some sense of what we're looking at in the House side. Now, there are other issues that could be addressed in this process by the Legislative Apportionment Board, by the legislature. This one is an interesting one. It's the Grand Isle Senate District that you see to the left. There's two ways to get from Colchester to South Hero, both parts of this district. You can leave the district and drive through Milton, or you can take the locomotion bike ferry, which only operates in the summer. Issues like this could be worked out through this process. And we just note that's one other challenge. There's another one on the next slide that we will note here. This is the problem that you have in a place like Huntington, where the town is in Addison Senate District, a House district. The town's also in a House district with Waterbury in Washington County, and then the school district, which is made up of Chittenden County towns. These are all problems that the LAB, the Legislative Apportionment Board, has to deal with every 10 years. But if we're only dealing with these particular kind of issues, then we might miss the once in a decade chance to address some of the bigger issues at play. So when we think about that, we are thinking about, for instance, the fact that women and people of color in Vermont have been underrepresented in the State House for 230 years. That means from the beginning here. And the current mishmash of single and multi-member districts creates a perception, if not also the reality, of unequal representation. So here we see, for instance, the percentage of BIPOC Vermonters in the State House is well below their percentage of the general population in Vermont. And while in Vermont, we see that there's a higher percentage of women in office than in most other states. It's still well below 50%. Again, there are no easy fixes to these issues, particularly given the current protocols and the approach mandated in law at present. But there isn't even any discussion of these issues in particular. There's no constitutional or legal direction that racial or gender representation be considered in drafting the maps. And next, while ageism may be even harder to address through redistricting than other forms of systemic discrimination, it's worth noting that the Vermont legislature, like local governments at the municipal level, tends to be older, whiter, and male. The average age, just as an example, the average age of the Vermont State Senate's 11 committee chairs is 72 years old. That's a full 30 years older than the median age of a Vermonter, which is 42. This is a second issue, or another issue that the lab could address. It's the fact that while districts like these may pass constitutional muster, this, again, kind of mishmash of single and multi-member districts creates a perception of unequal representation. This map, for instance, is of a section of Northwest Vermont. The numbers in red are the number of House plus Senate members for various towns in Chittenden, Franklin, and Lamoille counties. Some Vermonters have one representative and one senator. Some have two representatives, and some have 2, 3, or 6 senators. These disparities mean that some people have 2 elected officials to call in Montpelier, while others may have 3, 4, 5, 7, or 8. And that's what you see there. This strikes us at VPIRG as fundamentally unfair and something that the lab could seriously consider when it's proposing the maps. So then we come quickly to our recommendations. We urge the lab to consider a move to single member districts. It's worth noting that the Legislative Apportionment Board recently conducted a survey. Over 600 Vermonters participated, and 75% supported single member districts for the House, and 64% supported single member Senate districts. In this era where everything is so contentious, any poll that shows 2/3 of, or even 3/4 support for any issue is pretty remarkable. The Senate single member districts would be very popular with voters, but possibly not with incumbent legislators who ultimately, as we have noted, have to approve these maps. And that brings me to recommendation number 2. That would be a move to nonpartisan redistricting. The legislative apportionment process, the lab process is only advisory. There's no requirement that the legislature will accept the recommendations of the Legislative Apportionment Board. So we have a system today that appears to be politicians choosing their voters rather than voters choosing their politicians. My next 2 slides will talk about these recommendations in more detail. Now, the first is a map of county boundaries in Vermont. The next is the map of Senate districts. Of the 14 counties and 13 Senate districts, only 1 Senate district correlates exactly with a county border, a county boundary, which is Washington County today. So the idea that our Senate districts are the exact same as our counties is, of course, not accurate. For example, more than 3/4 of the population of what we call the Grand Isle Senate seat actually lives in Colchester, which is in Chittenden County. The third is a map which shows one possible option for what a 30 single-member Senate district state map would look like. While something like this, of course, would disregard county lines, smaller districts would, in our opinion, do a better job of fostering local community and democratic government. As you know, counties in Vermont don't have great meaning in the lives of most Vermonters. There are very few elected officials who represent the county. There are very few things that are actually done on a county basis in Vermont. And we think a map something like this, which gives everybody their own state senator representing a single district, again, would be a good thing for democracy. The one on the map on the right then would allow for more community engagement, more transparency, and more accountability, and lower barriers to entry into politics. We think that, again, that this would be best for our democracy, but we're not unrealistic about the chances that such a proposal would have as with the Legislative Apportionment Board or in the full legislature. And that's why we hope that Vermont will join the 16 other states that have taken redistricting process out of the hands of state legislators. As you see here in red, these are the 16 states that have set up some sort of an independent board, and every state does it differently. But I have no doubt that we could design a process before the next reapportionment process in 2030 that would, I think, improve the current process where the legislature, the elected officials of the state, make the ultimate decision. The next slide is my recommendation, my hope that you will take action, reach out to the Legislative Apportionment Board. Again, we've got several members here with us now, recommend nonpartisan redistricting process. And if you believe it is good for Vermont, recommend a single member districts as well. And that is a quick overview of some of our recommendations. Those are our VPIRG recommendations. And I certainly want to invite, if Kaya has anything to share with respect to rights and democracy, please feel free, and then we can take any questions that may have come up.
I want to thank everyone for these incredible presentations. This is really important work and on a somewhat confusing topic, right? This isn't something that we often think about when we're considering access to political power, when we're considering our voting rights and how that looks and feels once we get beyond the voting booth, right? So this is a really timely and important opportunity for us to engage on this. And I do actually have a question, if I may, for some of our panelists, if anyone feels comfortable talking about this, to get a little bit further than I think where Paul left off. So what we may have heard about in the media and what we understand around how redistricting looks and feels is often used within the context of concerns about what's called gerrymandering. So I'm wondering if anyone might be willing to speak a little bit to what is gerrymandering and how is the LAB process helping us to avoid the ability to have both either political power or to have political parties, for example, if that is the lever of power, to determine what those redistricting look like. There was some mention of, that there's legislators who would be using their own spheres of influence, say, I want to carve out a little bit of this town, a little bit of that town. And that might work well for some situations and it might not for others, as far as giving equal representation or ensuring that communities are not left behind. Is anyone willing to at least clarify that for our audience and speak a little bit to its relationship to the work of the LAB?
Kaya, I can offer that the situation or context of incumbents is not one of the factors that the state constitution or statute tells the apportionment board to look at or worry about. And in fact, as we do I'm sure because we all know some legislators, it probably leaks in, but we are not tracking the residences of incumbents as we do our mapping. Interestingly, the statute, not the Constitution, but the statute actually permits, when the process goes to the legislature, for some consideration to be given to incumbents. And I put some in quotes. But the other thing you can look at on the mapping is gerrymandering tends, not always, but can be associated with districts that look really weird because they have been drawn in an effort to accumulate a perceived or documented voter trends into places that are friendly to certain political parties or incumbents or both. And so one way you can judge a redistricting map proposal is to see whether you are perceiving that kind of stuff going on. And the apportionment board, and this will be true of the legislature, we use two different measurements of compactness. So we sort of can grade ourselves on how compact these things look like. And if you look at the existing map, because it's population driven, we don't always achieve that. But I would certainly open that up to Jeremy or to Jeannie Albert if you want to also comment on that.
Sure. I mean, so like Tom said, we have these measures of compactness that we will look at, that we will use to determine how well we did. But I know personally, when I'm going and I'm drawing, maps and I'm kind of trying stuff out, I'm not taking into account incumbency like Tom mentioned, but also it really just tends to follow geographic contours, and I'm really focused. It's honestly, it's hard enough to get it to work with the population cleanly. And as I'm trying to draw all single member districts, there will be some kind of like doglegging just by Vermont geography tends to be very north-south oriented, and you have ridge lines. So there's some that make sense, and that in order to maintain contiguity and reachability, that's one of the other measurements that we can look at. So the Grand Isle Colchester thing. So as I'm drawing districts, I'm certainly taking into account, is there a road that you can get from one part of the district to the other, or is that you can't get there from here? And as someone who has run for office, I'm cognizant of the problems with having hard to reach places in your district. I mean, we live in Vermont. There are places that are necessarily going to be rural and far out there, but it doesn't mean that we have to. We don't want to have districts where we have to drive across a ridge line and then down, and then down some valley state highway or something to get to it. I'm trying to avoid that as much as possible. Do we have, institutional controls that say that we have to do this? No, but all of the maps that I've seen, the drafts that I've seen, and the drafts that I've built don't really appear to have any sort of shapes of gerrymandering. But like we've talked about before, once the legislature gets their hands on it, then our job is essentially done. We're advisory, and they can draw districts that are different.
Oh, I'll just second what both Tom and Jeremy said, and it's wonderful to be here. So thank you for having this event. And I wanted to Jeremy reminded me that at one point I've lived in Vermont for about 35 years, and I was thinking about all the different districts I've lived in. I've lived in single member, I've lived in double member, and I specifically remember after a redistricting round happened, I ended up in a district that only touched at a point. That is, my town touched another town at this tiny little point that you, as Jeremy was just mentioning, you had to drive out of the district to get over to that other town. And, that by itself sort of suggests and gerrymandering has become known as a word, but I like almost to use the word engineering. It's been engineered to look a particular way for a particular purpose. And I would say I totally agree with Jeremy, and I have been struggling more just to make the numbers work because, as I say somewhat, hopefully humorously, the towns are just not the right size. I mean, it would be, I recently saw a map of, say, the panhandle of Texas, and the map that was produced recently by the legislature there, and it was just, basically a grid with a bunch of squares on it. And we just don't have that here, and isn't that a wonderful thing? But it does mean that just even thinking about how the numbers work, how the geography works, has consumed really most of my attention. But I do appreciate the question, and I guess just one last thing, I do think that working towards a nonpartisan board, as Paul was mentioning, I think is the right route. I think that's, I assume, through the legislature, and I think there are other democracy and election reforms that could go together with that I think are very exciting. And it's unfortunate that it's 10 years, but the time does fly by. So, getting started now isn't a bad thing.
I appreciate that. I'm looking at where we're at on time, and I want to make sure that if there's members of the audience, that they have an opportunity to place questions in the chat. We do have folks also watching our Facebook page, so if you're watching and live streaming from there, you can add your questions or comments there, and we will try to have them brought in. So we've covered quite a bit. That's been really interesting and food for thought. I'm seeing, I'd love to hear your thoughts, Paul, if there's more that we should bring here. I'm seeing some interesting questions in the chat here within the Zoom room, and we also have a few that are seated as well that we can absolutely bring into the conversation.
Yeah, I'm happy to bring those other questions in, and I appreciate, again, several of the apportionment board members being here tonight to share their ideas and thoughts. And yeah, it's 10 years off. If you're talking about changing the process, that would come into play, but it could. I hope you all will at least consider whether that's a recommendation that you could make to the legislature, which would make my job easier and our constituents and supporters' jobs easier as we go to the legislature to say, hey, a really good idea came to you from the apportionment board beyond just the size and shape of the specific districts, but maybe it could go this way. So, so thanks on that. Tom, I see a hand up.
Yeah, two quick ones. I know that Tom Hughes had put this in the chat. It was a question of how what happens when the apportionment board delivers its proposals to the legislature. Are they followed? Are they tossed in the can? And it's some of each. I think sometimes the initial reaction of the legislature is, that's crazy. That's too much change. That's too different. But I think when the legislators themselves, particularly on the two committees that work on it, get into the weeds and understand how difficult it is to make these new lines work, I think they end up going back to the apportionment board's proposal and saying, well, maybe we'll go back and take a look at that. One of the things the board is committed to doing is not only filing our first choice, our recommendation for the Senate and the House, but to also make available, I mean, it's public record, but to offer the other maps that we've drawn that may look different, but may be useful to the legislature. And lastly, there's a really interesting and I think laudable thing going on now. You mentioned, Paul, Huntington, plural Huntington, that's been bounced out of its county for a House district and for a Senate district, in both cases to solve population negative deviation problems in other places. I mean, Huntington's about 1,920 people, I think. But Huntington not only by itself, but with the other towns in the Mount Mansfield Unified Union School District has become, they become active. Their select board and their board of civil authority and individual residents from Huntington and Richmond, Bolton, Jericho and Underhill have been reaching out to the apportionment board and saying, this isn't right, it's not fair, but they're also saying something that we hadn't heard 10 years ago, and that is, we're all in the same unified union school district, and it really makes sense for us all to be at least in the same Senate district, so we have some unified representation there. And they're actually hosting a forum tomorrow night that apportionment board members are going to be, some of us are going to be attending. So it's very, I think, laudable that they're getting activated relatively early in the process and not waiting until this goes to the legislature. So good for them.
Well, thank you for that. So this has been a really incredible and robust conversation, and I want to let you all know who are tuning in, who will be watching this recording, that you can still have your voice raised in these questions. This is something you're absolutely more than welcome to contact your local municipalities around those conversations if they're happening in your spaces. And there are ways to, as we placed into the chat, and we'll continue to make those available to you, ways that you can talk directly to the apportionment board. We also have, and we'll try to put links in the chat around these as well, so that you can see what that census data really looks like. It's a bit stark, and it's important to know how our state has changed. Rights and Democracies also created a population and district change map that can help show the change in population by state house and Senate maps, and showing districts that are now too big or too small. So each of these are really important tools that can help you to feel a little bit more confident and understanding this process, and that it is key we are engaging in this very moment, as this impacts all of our lives and so much within our governance. So this really is an opportunity to do this. Otherwise, we're looking at 10 years out before we'll be able to raise the hopes, the dreams, and the concerns that we have around this really important work. So just recognizing our beautiful time here this evening, and so very grateful for the members of our apportionment board who've come to join us tonight. I want to thank Tom Little. I want to thank Paul Burns for co-hosting this with us. Thank you, board member Jeremy Hansen, for tuning in, Jean Albert for being a part with us. Thank you for your great support, Tom Hughes and Chris Winters. Again, my name is Kaya Morris, and I am so grateful to have spent this time with you from Rights and Democracy. Find us on social media. You can find us on the web, and let's keep the conversations going. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a wonderful rest of your day, and we'll see you at the polls.
You're here.
Thank you. Good night.
Bye-bye.